Law students and focused learners, to this explainer. Okay, today we're taking on something absolutely massive, literally taming the unruly oceans. We're going to take what is honestly a pretty heavy, complex law of the sea syllabus and turn it into a fascinating journey. Seriously, if you've ever stood on a beach, looked out at that wild, seemingly lawless expanse of water, and thought, how in the world do humans actually regulate that? Well, you're in exactly the right place. We're going to break down how centuries of absolute chaos finally transformed into the modern legal order we use today.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for the explainer. We'll kick things off with that massive historical question, who actually owns the ocean? Then we'll speed through the 20th century scramble to codify the seas, actually map out the modern maritime zones, and finish up by previewing some of the incredibly complex modern topics you're going to run into in a full maritime law course.
So, let's start with part 1, the historical battle for the seas.
Who actually owns the ocean? I mean, it sounds like a totally simple, almost philosophical question, right? But legally, it is incredibly profound. For centuries, the oceans were just this wild, untamable frontier. The sheer audacity of early human ambition, the idea that a king or a pope could just point to a map and claim ownership over thousands of miles of unpredictable, unmapped water, that literally sets the stage for everything we study in modern maritime law.
Let's just walk through the chronology of these early claims, because they are wild. Think about it. 1492, Columbus makes his famous voyage, right? And that immediately sparks this frantic race among European powers to basically put a legal fence around these vast unknown waters. Literally the next year, 1493, the Pope issues a papal bull. A year after that, 1494, we get the Treaty of Tordesillas. And believe it or not, it wasn't until the 17th century that we saw any major intellectual pushback with the proposal of the freedom of the seas. But the historical reality of these early claims is just staggering when you actually look at it on a map.
And this brilliantly illustrates what I mean. Notice that red line dividing the globe? Honestly, it looks almost like a fanciful children's story illustration, right? Like a king just drawing a line across the world with a giant crayon. But in 1493, this was a very real, very serious geopolitical event. Pope Alexander VI essentially drew an imaginary line pole to pole and just casually divided all newly discovered territories and the oceans between them between Spain and Portugal. The Treaty of Tordesillas shifted that line a bit in 1494, but the whole shebang stayed the same. Two nations claiming they owned half the globe. Naturally, other nations, especially the British, were like, no way. They absolutely rejected this, insisting on the right to use the oceans for fishing and navigation, just as a matter of fair use.
And that fierce resistance, that laid the groundwork for a massive shift in legal philosophy. The real game changer here is the freedom of seas doctrine, introduced by Hugo Grotius in the 17th century. Grotius made this brilliant argument that no single state can have sovereignty over the ocean because, well, by its very nature, the sea is free. It's common to all of us. You literally cannot fence in the waves. That foundational argument eventually dismantled those Spanish and Portuguese monopolies and birthed the modern maritime thought that actually makes our globalized trade possible today.
All right, moving on to section 2. Let's talk about how we finally started codifying these rules in the 20th century.
Because look, philosophy is great and all, but as naval technology and global trade absolutely exploded in the 20th century, nations realized, okay, we actually need to write these rules down. So we see this rapid acceleration in international diplomacy. We start with the 1930 Hague Conference, kind of an early attempt to get things on paper. But things really heat up in 1945. U.S. President Harry Truman issues these proclamations claiming jurisdiction over the natural resources of the continental shelf. And wow, that triggered a massive domino effect globally. The UN had to step in, which led to UN Close I in 1958, UN Close II in 1960, and further optional protocols in 1962. It was just a frantic, absolutely necessary scramble to figure out ocean governance once and for all.
Which brings us to our third section, mapping the maritime zones.
So we're moving out of the history books and into the actual physical reality of the law today. After all those centuries of treaties and papal bulls and endless UN conferences, what are the actual rules right now? How do we literally, spatially divide up the water right off our beaches?
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it takes all that complex, abstract international law and turns it into physical geography you can actually see. Listen up, because for any law students out there, this concept is basically your master key. Starting over on the left at the land, who draw a baseline. Moving out to sea, those first 12 nautical miles, that makes up the territorial sea. Here, a coastal state exercises almost total national sovereignty, even up into the airspace.
So, as a practical example for law students, if a crime occurs, say 10 miles offshore, inside that territorial sea, the coastal state has full jurisdiction to prosecute. Simple as that. But as you move further out, stretching up to 200 nautical miles, you hit the Exclusive Economic Zone, or EEZ. Now, the state doesn't own the water itself here. Foreign ships can totally pass right through. But the coastal state does own the rights to the resources, stuff like fish and oil. Below all that is the continental shelf. And finally, keep going, and beyond all national jurisdiction, you reach the high seas and the deep seabed, the grand finale that belongs to absolutely no single nation.
Finally, Section 4. Let's look at some specific modern maritime law topics to round out the curriculum.
Let's actually look at how those physical zones we just talked about translate into the super complex issues you'll tackle in a full academic course. Because, let me tell you, every single one of those spatial zones is just packed with intricate legal debates. For instance, you're going to have to analyze the right of innocent passage, figuring out exactly when and how a foreign military vessel can peacefully transit through your sovereign waters. You'll study the intense geometry of drawing straight baselines around jagged coastlines, bays, and islands. You'll dive deep into continental shelf rights, the tricky balancing act of duties in the EEZ, and of course, the wild jurisdictional rules governing crimes and commerce way out on the open high seas.
But hey, this whole framework, it's not just an academic exercise in drawing imaginary lines on the water. It is absolutely crucial for tackling real, modern-day crises. I mean, these are the exact laws we rely on to combat marine pollution, whether we're talking about toxic waste dumped off ships or nasty runoff from land-based and atmospheric sources. Plus, this legal framework set up the International Seabed Authority to try and govern the exploitation of the deep ocean floor. And perhaps most importantly, you'll learn about the dispute settlement mechanisms under UN Clause 3. When countries start clashing over fishing rights or billion-dollar oil fields, this is the legal machinery that actually stops those arguments from escalating into all-out war.
And that brings us right to the edge of the known legal map, leaving us with a really critical, provocative question. How are these laws going to hold up as humanity begins aggressively mining the international seabed area? I mean, we've managed to build a somewhat stable legal order for the surface and the coasts, sure. But the deep ocean floor is officially designated as the common heritage of mankind. So as technology advances, and as the massive corporate scramble for rare earth metals down in the deep sea intensifies, will our meticulously crafted legal framework actually survive? Or are we just headed straight back to the Wild West chaos of 1492? Keep that question in the back of your mind as you continue your studies. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer today, and hey, stay curious.